we have found slope from a graph. And so today we're going to look at how to find slope from a table or 2 points. These are related, so that's why we're doing them together. Now, when you see a table like this is a set of points, right? This is a point, this is a point. These are all points. We could graph them on a graph. We could then draw our little slope triangle and find what we need, but that would be a little inefficient. So we're going to learn how to do this without having to graph. And we want to remember that slope is the vertical change of a line over the horizontal change of a line. And we said that to sort of write that a little shorter, we're going to call that delta y over delta x. The slope of a line is its change in its y coordinates over the change in the x coordinates. So what you do is you look at the table, and what you want to be very careful here is know that your y coordinates are here and your x coordinates are here. And you're going to ask yourself, well, how do I get from -2 to 0? I add 2, right? From 0 to 2, I add 2. Each one of these you'll see on this particular table, I'm adding 2 each time. So what's the change in my y for this table? For this set of points, my change in my y, my delta y, is at +2, right? So now let's look at the x. How do I get from -6 to -3? I add 3. From -3 to 0, I add 3. From 0 to 3, add 3. 3 to 6, add 3. 6 to 9, add 3. So my change in my x coordinates is 3. So change in y over change in x is 2/3. The slope of this line is 2/3. If we were to graph these points and do the slope triangle, we get the same thing. Okay? Now, a lot of times the tables that we see are in this vertical format, but occasionally they will be in a horizontal format, and you need to pay attention to which one's y and which one's x. So let's look. Here my y coordinates are at the bottom. How do I get from 4 to 4? I don't add anything, right? 4 to 4, nothing. 4 to 4, nothing. Okay, so my change in y here is 0. How do I get from -5 to -7? Subtract 2, is that right? 7 to 9, subtract 2, -9 to -11, subtract 2. So I get 0 over -2. Well, what is 0 divided by anything? That is 0. What kind of line would this be if I were to graph it? If I were to graph these points, what kind of line should it be? Well, since my slope is 0, this is going to be what? This is going to be a horizontal line. Okay? Now, look at these two tables. Feel free to try these on your own if you want. Be careful with your signs. Okay, so here I look for my change in y from -1 to 4. I think I add 5. Same thing from 4 to 9, and from 9 to 14. From 9 to 7, my change in x, what do? I go down 2, 7 to 5, I subtract 2, 5 to 3, I subtract 2. So my change in y is 5. My change in x is -2. Now, when one of these is negative, what's a positive divided by a negative? A negative. When one of these is negative, the whole slope is negative. I could just say this is -5/2. If you leave the negative in the denominator or in the numerator, it's not wrong. But if there's one negative, the slope is negative. So if I were to graph this line, I should have a line with negative slope. Okay? What about the next one? If I say my change in y from -2 to -1, what? I add 1, and I add 1, and I add 1. That's the same all the way down here. If I go from -1 to -1, that's 0, plus 0, plus 0, all the way. Now, I do notice right here, this 2 to 8 is a different, that's +6, but the answer would be the same, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. But my change in y is 1, and my change in x is 0. If I have 0 in the denominator, anything divided by 0 is undefined. If I were to graph this, since it has undefined slope, what kind of line would it have to be? It would have to be a vertical line. So if I were to have used these points down here, I would have 6 over 0. 6 over 0 is still undefined. I would have gotten the same slope even if I had used these two that had a different change over here. Okay? All right, now let's look at 2 points in particular. All right, this next way we're going to look at, this is sort of the algebraic way. This is the fanciest way of finding slope that we will learn as Algebra 1 students. This is the formula. This is the most generalized way that you can use anytime. You have to start to find the slope, and we've seen this every time. You have to start with 2 points. So I'm going to start with 2 points, and the way we talk about these points, or the way we name these points is x sub 1, y sub 1, and x sub 2, y sub 2. Notice I'm saying sub, that means subscript, that means it's down below. This is not an exponent, this is written down below. The reason I use subscripts, this is an x-coordinate, this is an x-coordinate, this is a y-coordinate, this is a y-coordinate. Well, how do I tell them apart? This is the x-coordinate in the first point, this is the x-coordinate in the second point. This is the y-coordinate in the first point, this is the y-coordinate in the second point. So we use these subscripts so we can still use x and y, and we don't have to introduce a whole lot of other variables, but we can tell them apart by labeling some of them with a 1 and some of them with a 2. Now, we have said that slope is the change in y over the change in x. What operation has to do with finding the change in something? That would be subtraction, right? Change is difference, and difference is subtraction. So I need the difference in the y-coordinates and the difference in the x-coordinates. Well, difference is subtraction, so my slope formula is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. That is your fancy formula for slope. We're doing this y-coordinate minus this y-coordinate, that's the change in the y's, and this x-coordinate minus this x-coordinate, that's the change in the x's. So how we do this is if we've got 2 points, we label one of them as x1, y1, and one of them as x2, y2. So here I'm going to label my first one x1, y1, and my second one x2, y2. And my slope formula is y sub 2, that's 14, minus y sub 1, that's 6, over x sub 2, that's 5, minus x sub 1, that's 1, right? So 14 minus 6 over 5 minus 1. That's the change in y over the change in x. So 14 minus 6 is 8, and 5 minus 1 is 4, and 8 over 4 is 2. So if I were to graph these 2 points and do a slope triangle, I would get 8 over 4, which is 2. All right, so let's look at the next one. So I label my first one x sub 1, y sub 1, and my second point x sub 2, y sub 2. Then I do y sub 2, that's negative 1, minus y sub 1, that's 1, over x sub 2 is 6, minus x sub 1 is 4. So negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2, 6 minus 4 is 2, and negative 2 over 2 is negative 1. Now, notice that the slope formula involves subtraction, and if we are going to make an error in any operation, it's going to be subtraction. So we have to be very careful with the slope formula because of subtraction. So to avoid having so many troubles with subtraction, and maybe to keep us from making so many mistakes, if I don't want to use the slope formula, I can use a mini table. So let's see what this looks like. If I were to take these 2 points and use my slope formula, I would say x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. And then I would do 1 minus a negative 20. See how that subtraction gets kind of funky? And negative 1 minus a negative 1. So subtraction, I add the opposite, and I get 1 plus 20 is 21. And I have to add the opposite down here, so negative 1 plus 1 is 0. 21 over 0, this is what? This is undefined. Now, what if instead of the slope formula I had made a mini table? What if I did an x and y column and I put -1, -20, and then -1, 1. Okay, so how do I get from -20 to a +1? I add 21. How do I get from -1 to -1? I add 0, and I would still get change in y over change in x. I would still get 21 over 0, which would still be undefined. So some of you might find the mini table easier than the slope formula. So let's look at it right here. Let me make a mini table. I've got the points 9, 15, and I've got the point -6, 5. So how do I get from 15 to 5? I subtract 10. How do I get from 9 to -6? I subtract 15. Is that right? 9 to -6, I go down 15. So my change in y over my change in x, I get -10 over -15. Those are both negative. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and that simplifies to 2/3. So you can use the slope formula with 2 points, or you can use the mini table, whichever way you find easiest.